Welcome back to the weekly briefing. Today is Wednesday, December 13th. I'm Joel. I'm joined by Tim, and this weekly briefing is a 30-minute break that we take every week, except when there's things like Thanksgiving holidays and other disruptions.
Then we take a
But
2-week break.
we're back. Yeah, we're back. And the briefing, the intention is for us to talk about a hot topic or a trend or something that we're spotting behind the scenes, maybe that you may not be aware of, that we feel like creative leaders, business owners that are running studios and production companies should know about. And Tim, you can lay the setup for the conversation we're going to have today, because this was a thread that started in the community inside of RevCommunity, a day or 2 days ago?
Yeah, it was. Well, first of all, again, welcome back. I did miss you, Joel. It's been 2 weeks. It's kind of funny to get back in the habit and realize,
I know, right?
we have to do this again.
Yeah.
This is what I love about RevCommunity is somebody could be very transparent and honest, talk about where they're struggling, what their current issues are, and have a body of people that can relate or give advice to, and so on. And this specific post talking about a producer was just the thought process of like, where do good producers come from? What the struggle might be, and a sense like, what's that person's job maybe while they're working with you? So how do we make them successful or keep them on track or keep them loyal to the company? I was a producer. I loved this job when I was producing. I loved from the bidding process to breaking down the projects to what felt like reinventing the wheel on a project by project basis. There's always so many ways to solve that problem. And I loved picking through all the issues and all the desires creatively, and then limiting that project down to the budget and the schedule. I love that entire puzzle piece. So the question would be, how do we find people that are crazy like me, I guess, is when you're trying to hire the producer, where do we find these oddballs that want this job, this impossible task, and put their own butt on the line for it?
Well, I'm gonna preface that by answering this question: why hire a producer? Just really briefly, I want to touch on that too, because a lot of people might be wondering, well, what is it that a producer really does? And the way I think of it is like, well, if you're a creative, the producer is the one who just makes sure it all gets done. They produce the product that your company generates. And they're generally that interface between the client and your team, which means they're invaluable, because now you can run your company and be creative, and they're managing all those other aspects, which means the project's on time, it's on budget, it's on purpose, all of that. And what I know, Tim, is when there was life before I ever worked with a real producer at my company, and then I hired a real producer, and wow, like, never looked back. Producers are my favorite people in the world, because it was almost like every time I met a great producer, my thought was, how can I hire you?
Yeah, let's talk about. So I like this question of why. Why do we need a producer? What is the producer's role, and how do we set it up properly so we're looking for the right person? I feel like our industry has evolved in such a way that we use producers as babysitters. And it's interesting to me how often I get on calls with new clients, new studios, and they haven't given the producer all of the information so that they could be successful. They hold back with what the total bid is that the client gives them, and they only give the producer a small percentage of those dollars without being understanding of what the client is paying. Maybe they don't give internal rate with a lot of clarity. One of the biggest faux pas, Joel, this one drives me crazy, is when everybody at the company makes the same on the rate card. So everybody's $250, no matter if they're the senior animator or the junior editor, everyone's $250 a day. And you just can't get down to the really important aspect of the producer's job, which is the decision making. Producers are there to help you make these decisions. I like the idea that there's a creative director, creative person at the company that has the vision and thought of what should be on the screen, what we're trying to produce creatively. And then you have a production partner that's there trying to determine what's the best materials, resources, ideas that it takes to get that financed, get that job done, get those people hired, and get that project delivered on time and on budget. And these two, it's not contentious, but they work in tandem with each other with the understanding of desires, dreams, limits, and your protocol, but really in order to get that project out the door properly.
Yeah, there's a dream that I'm going to put out there called, if your producer is not only has the skills and the abilities to perform the job well, but if you can entrust this person, I'll say she, if you can entrust her with the budget, right? And not just, as you say, Tim, not just the responsibility of getting the job done, but the authority to get the job done within proper guardrails that are very clear. We got to have a simple scorecard. So your producer is running that job. And every week she says, here's where we're at. This is how it's going. We're winning. And you're just saying, yay, keep going, keep going, keep going. Once that is running, I'm telling you, this is when you stop thinking of a producer as someone that is following your orders. And instead, the producer becomes your boss, right? My best producers would come into my office and tell me every day, hey, this is what's going on. This is when I need you. Other than, this time and this time, get out of here and go do whatever it is that you do, Mr. President of the company. And I'm like, I love you. Thank you. You're my boss. And you've made it really clear for me how I can help this company be successful.
Yeah. And if you look at the expenses of your company, we're talking to 50 to 60%, sometimes 80% of all of the expenses are being handled by these individuals. So clearly you want to have enough understanding of that person's ability and responsibility. If they're spending 80% of all the money the company touches is going across the producer's desk, we need to know that they're trustworthy and in the right place. So one of the questions, Joel, of like how to hire the right producer is setting them up to understand what the producer's responsibility is so that you're finding the right person for the right role, right? If your thought is the person is a babysitter and you're trying to hire a babysitter for the projects and not really give them that authority and decision-making power, you might be setting up that person, the person you're hiring, for the wrong position, role at your company. And vice versa. Maybe you need to be set up, or you need to learn something in order to set up your company properly, to bring those people in and train them properly to get the job done. If you don't have those aspects in place, you might be matching apples and oranges.
So here's one little, I don't know what I would call this. Is this a judo move or something? If I was going to be hiring a producer, first of all, one thing I would say is I would not create a really fancy job description. This is just my personal opinion, but I low-key hate a detailed job description of a producer and that I put out there and then I get applicants. Why? Because all the applicants, I've just teed them up and given them essentially all of the information to regurgitate to me to prove that they're the ideal candidate. They're just going to read it back to me and say, yeah, I can do that. And yes, I do that, and so forth. I much prefer to say, we're hiring a senior producer, submit your information here. Because a lot of people are going to say, I don't really know what that means. And those people just disqualified themselves.
Yeah, interesting. Because
Right?
the person should have a vision at certain levels, have a vision of what the responsibility is and be able to speak into that position, what they think their strengths are and how their strengths relate to the role that you have.
I mean, imagine as part of the interview process, if I'm hiring a producer and I say, so you tell me, what is it a producer does and how are you going to make my company successful? Okay, people that really can't answer that question, I mean, thank you, goodbye, right?
Yeah. And so maybe there's even like a big picture thought here too, of just what it takes to hire anyone. Like what is hiring somebody and how do we understand what's the right way to go about that? I think you're right that there are there's one approach that says, hey, let's put all of our cards on the table. Let's describe this thing perfectly. And then of course the person is going to read that description and disqualify themselves because I put all the information out there and they're going to say, well, that's not me. Don't hire me. And then but the reality is I think a lot of people will apply for whatever's available. If they're looking for a job and they want to do it, they're going to, put their name in the hat there and hope that you pick them. And then you have to go through the interview process and discern, wait, is this the right person for it? On the
Right.
other aspect, like we don't put anything out there. We just call our friends and say, hey, do you know anyone that's a good producer? And they go, yeah, here, call so-and-so. And it's without any real understanding of description. You're just following a recommendation of someone else you know.
Well, let's make note of this. That everybody here, I'm guessing you work at a really cool company. So when you say we're hiring a producer and you list everything out, people that see that, they look at your company and they say, "Oh my gosh." Think of the most unqualified person who fancies themselves a project manager, thinks they could be a producer. They're going to say, "Man, I would love to work at this company. Look at all the cool work they do. What creative people they are." And now that I have this nice fancy job description, I'm going to go in there and present myself as if I can do all this stuff. And the thought I'm having, Tim, is how would you, maybe as a former producer, how would you set up the hiring process so in effect you are expecting the candidate to produce the interview process, right? So maybe you see what I'm saying? Like it's a bit of a shrewd move where I
That's
say,
pretty fun.
right, like I might talk to somebody and say, yeah, I don't really know how this works. I'm not even sure how to schedule this. Um, what should we do? Like, how am I going to put the person to the test, produce this interview, produce the result we're looking for, produce the heck out of all this, because I want to see how you are like
Yeah.
in the heat of battle.
Can you boss up even in the interview process? Yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
funny.
Right. Because I mean, you want somebody who can potentially tell you, well, look, I don't want to tell you how to do this job, but here we go.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to say that most of us, I almost want to make a poll, but I can't type fast enough and talk at the same time to make this
Well,
poll.
you tell me, I can do
But
it if you
I
need me
almost
to.
want to, I almost want to figure out where people actually hire. Where do your hires come from? Where do your employees come from? Um, and I'm going to guess that majority of us already know or are 1 degree of separation from the people we often hire. Especially at
Yeah.
the level of a producer, art director, creative director, senior animator, senior editor. It's somebody that you've worked with as a freelancer and then you brought them in full time. You have some hands on understanding of who this person is, and then you make them a full time offer. The
Yes.
other, if you don't have that direct connection, is you recognize the place that they came from. Oh, you come from this really respectable place, you've been there for a few years. This is a moment that you have their experience. And as a business owner, I want you to bring that company's experience into my company. So the things that you've learned or the way that they've operated, when I'm interviewing you or figuring out if you're the right person, I want to understand what you've done somewhere else to see if I need those skills or those systems and operations in my company. I'm going to
Well,
guess where
there's
that's the majority of where it comes from. A cold lead straight off the internet that you've never met somebody is a lot more rare.
right. Well, there's a cool thought here in the chat that we should mention, because people are saying, would you hire somebody full time? Would you hire somebody part time? Would you hire freelance first? And I was agreeing, well, of course you want to hire somebody freelance first. However, there are some buts, right? One but is the idea that sometimes if a person is a freelancer who always wants to be a freelancer, wants to stay a freelancer, don't hire that person. It's going to be too frustrating when the time comes, because often that person will say, sure, I'll come work for you full time at that freelance rate.
Yeah.
That's not realistic. Okay. That's not how this works. So make sure you don't set yourself up for frustration. My other thought is, you've seen this happen, Tim. If you're the higher the level of the person that you're hiring, the more unlikely this whole freelance thing is ever going to happen. For example, if you're hiring a superstar executive producer who has a full-time, big salary, big job, and you say, well, I won't hire you until you come freelance for me first, they're going to say, get the hell out of here.
Yeah. They've already proven themselves in the field. Yeah. And to go back to even the idea of what a freelancer's mentality can be, especially as a producer, is that they're the reality of freelance work is that they always have to go find their next job. So they were only so loyal to you, but they're finding their next paycheck. They're not going to stick around, see the project all the way through. And sometimes, only sometimes, that producer doesn't really finish the job completely, even if it looks like they didn't balance the budget, and you don't have any real understanding how you finished the job financially, or if they actually delivered, because the next studio is calling and they have to jump ship. So there is a sense of, when it comes to a producer, an art director, a creative director, it's nice to have a sense of loyalty with your business. What I call it is retained knowledge. Like, I want that when I start working with a producer and we have a mojo, we start fitting together and getting projects done, and now the chemistry is working, I don't want to let go of that good investment time. So I actually do want to commit to someone sooner than later at full time. If you have the luxury of an in-house producer and you're so busy that you're hiring freelance producers to make up a gap in work, and then you can fill in one of those freelance producers to your second staff producer, that's a nice little crossover, because you have somebody in-house you invested. But if you have no current investors, I don't know if I would go with a freelancer for too long before I grab that person and pull them in and say, hey, we need to make systems and routines and operations for production, and I need you to be that production shell. I need you to be running those operations.
So Tim, I do have a little poll ready to go, and you just tell me whether or not you like this idea. Because I got into a little bit of a disagreement with David in the community last night over this question of references. So I was thinking, why don't I just do a quick poll called "What's the deal with references?" Meaning, do you speak to a candidate's references that they provide? Do you reach out to those people when they say, oh, this person will vouch for me, this person will vouch for me? Do you want to do a quick poll on that?
Yeah, do it. Let's see it.
All right, here we go. Save, and is it live? Launch, here we go. Boom.
Well, there's some really good feedback in these. While this is going on, I'm gonna read some of this.
Okay, do you speak to a candidate's references? Always, never. See, I don't give anybody, there's no sometimes going on here. Come on, people. So the context, as people are filling out the poll, is this, that when I heard the process and the frustrations that David was going through, which, by the way, I have to genuinely commiserate with our friend David, because these are our lives, right? Like, when we we hire a producer, we put all this responsibility on them, and when it doesn't work out, it is really painful on multiple levels. So I just want to preface with that. But one thing I noticed was, and I said, David, did you check this person's references? Did you call them? And his answer was, no, I never do that, because I figure that person only shared with me people who are going to speak well of them. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because I totally disagree. And I shared the story of once I hired an executive producer, and there were two things that happened. When I call on one of her references, this lady that I called on was an executive at a major TV network. So I knew this person is not going to BS me. This person is a legit person who has a reputation to protect. And when I talked to her, she said, Joel, if you don't hire her, you're nuts. In fact, I would hire her back in a heartbeat. So let me know if she's still available. If you do hire her, please let me know, because anywhere she goes, I want to work with that agency.
Yeah.
So we ended up getting work out of that person. So that's the power of when you fully vet somebody and you know you are dealing with a superstar. It's like, it made me confident. Now, not only am I hiring this person, I'm going to pay her every dollar she deserves, because at the time that was the most I had ever paid a producer, and it was scary. And boy, did I learn a lot from that person over the next 2 years.
Yeah, I that's an interesting experience, because what you're really saying is that, by the way, here's the poll results.
Oh, thanks.
57% said that they do call, and 43% said never. And so it's not exactly 50-50, but it's not, nothing's overwhelming on one side or the other.
Right.
And in your experience, Joel, you basically were making the point that you actually vetted the reference that you were polling. Yeah. So the person you thought, this is the right person to call as a reference to find out what the relationship's like. There are some references that if you got a list of them, you're like, I don't to call the person's mom and uncle and whatever. I'm not getting anything really real. And I think what I've learned is that people will not give a negative reference about an individual, right? You're only putting references on your sheet that you know will give honest feedback, but often positive feedback. I'm not going to give you the person that laid me off recently. But your ability to question that reference and find out attributes. What did you appreciate about them? How did they handle this situation? Give me an idea of their success. Those are all ways of asking something that are in the positive, but you can still get feedback of who that person is, the kind of decision making they have, what they feel like their strengths are. And personality wise, you are trying to mix this person's success with your ability to manage them. And not every individual, not just because they're successful under one individual doesn't mean they're going to be successful under you. You're trying to find out, wait, who are you that they were successful under? Tell me more about the role that you play, that when you hired this producer, it worked out. Oh, you were a television executive and their producer? That's very different than my small business that I don't have those kind of resources. Oh, she would always finance the project. I don't know if, I think we're gonna have to, stick with smaller budgets and kind of rub pennies together to make this project happen. You can still hear through that person as an individual, the roles that they've had before and how they might or might not be a fit for you by talking to those references.
And I heard, I think you made an important point there that's worth reiterating, that, don't call on references that you already know aren't going to be super meaningful. So you want to look at that list of references and say, wow, this is the owner of the studio where this person worked, perhaps. Okay, that's interesting. I want to talk to that person. This person, I looked them up on LinkedIn. I don't know who they are. I don't understand the relevance, that sort of thing. And then here's my other thought too, Tim, is you're calling someone who's going to give a positive report, right? So now set that as your baseline. Set that as your zero. So to the extent that the person gives extremely glowing, extremely positive, that's a good sign. Because I would say any reference that I call and they give me just a nice, solid endorsement, that's actually a red flag for me.
Yeah.
I'm looking for someone who says, oh my God, that person is the greatest person that was ever born.
Yeah. there are aspects to the people's personalities that you want to come through. There's like a study of behavior science happening right now, and they're basically comparing how we humans make decisions about others and are we good judges of other people. I have a feeling it's related to the current political scene and why certain political leaders are chosen, and their ability of we're clearly not choosing good political leaders. And so they're doing these tests or experiments to feel like if we ask a group of people to choose a leader, or if we just chose leaders at random, what's the probability of success in doing it by random or human's choice? And they're finding there's very little difference, random or not, which makes me think that in most cases, when we're choosing another individual, we're actually randomly choosing them. And for me, I would say that most of our bias in choosing a role is based off of the person's resume, their previous experience, something that you heard about them. And then we imagine that they're going to repeat that success when they come work for us. So we have this poor imagination of what it really takes to be a human being at our company, different than being a human being at a different company, and saying, oh, they can repeat it. This is the same exact position. And it's not. So when I'm often helping my clients interview people, one, I'm lucky because I'm the outsider, right? I can ask different questions and I have a different role. So I can kind of play this game of, yeah, I'm here to make you guys successful and tell me where the pieces are going to fit, whatever. One of the key attributes I choose is responsiveness, especially when it comes to being a producer or a salespeople. What I mean by that is when I'm talking to the producer, this candidate, I want to know, are they listening to my feedback? Do they understand what we're trying to accomplish? Can they fill in the blanks from what we're saying to what their understanding is? And can they build the bridge between the two? Also, is it just a one-sided conversation? Are they just blanketly talking about all the things that they've done in the past and not ever really trying to understand what they would be trying to produce for my company, what we're trying to accomplish here, what projects or clients might be different than where they've been before. And I want to know how these pieces fall together, and are they responsive to the conversation we're having. If I feel like I can't get through, no matter how big that resume is, the term I would use is overqualified to be nice. But what I mean is, like, they're kind of too far in their head. They don't want to engage who we actually are and solve our real problems. They want to just solve the one problem they've always solved. Even if we don't have the problem, they just want to solve that problem again, because that's where they were successful in the past. And that's what I'm really trying to work through with my producer is, who are you? What is your strength? How do you understand things? Can you produce this? Can you fill in the blanks and get this done with the parameters we're talking about? And are you going to be responsive to that? If I think so, then I could delegate that authority and decision-making to them in the future. Okay, that's a beginning of a good engagement.
You were saying something in there that made me think, I'm realizing I've had some good success where, so my client, meaning the business owner, doesn't do the entire interview process him or herself, their self, that meaning maybe there's an advantage to having at least a first round of interviews with somebody else in the company or a third party like yourself, Tim, because if you're in pain and you're the owner and you're talking to that producer, they're probably going to pick up on your pain and tell you what you want to hear. That's just the thought I'm having, is that maybe this is part of the recipe that often gets us into trouble, is we talk to somebody and we describe, oh, I need this so bad and I'm struggling and I'm working late nights and I can't get my clients under control. And they're just going to mirror back to you and say, oh, that feels so bad for you. Well, I can do that, and that. And you think, well, because they said it, it must be true, because I want it to be true so bad.
Yeah. And it's almost a different appeal, isn't it? Hey, here's the problem I'm having. Can you fix my problem? Oh yeah, I guess I can. But is that a full-time job? Is that going to sustain you for a few years? Is that a position of growth? Or are you just coming in this moment, fixing in the moment, and then after a few months, we're going to be frustrated with each other and just aggravated that we don't have another problem to solve that you love to solve, and that's the role that you have. I just think that a lot of us have to recognize that this producer, if you're the creative person, this producer is your partner. If you're a salesperson, this producer is equally your partner, because they're taking on that client that you have and caretaking for them and giving you sales feedback. But if you're an executive producer and you're hiring and you have multiple producers, I think you have to realize that your job is probably more likely making them successful than they will be successful on their own. So how I set them up, how I delegate to them, what I'm expecting of them, and the information I'm willing to give them and trust to that producer so that they can be successful, make my project successful. That's all work you have to do internally. And I want my clients, I want these studios to get the information out. That's why the factors method, the splits, making very clear understanding of what the project is, how we're going to spend that money, how to be successful, and how to delegate that responsibility to the producers, and then let them go off and be successful in what they're doing and not micromanage them. Those are all key aspects of making them successful.
Yeah, I'm enjoying right now several companies that are going through that shift of being owner produced to being producer led, and seeing that handoff. And if we're using the factors method, we have our roll up, we have our splits. It's amazing how the owner is like, oh yeah, I can let go. It's all running, it's all happening. And they start to turn their radar back to focusing on their genius. So this is probably the moment we have to say, hey, at some point you and I should run the producer masterclass again and teach a lot of that. Okay, now I hired that person, now what part of it?
Yeah, great idea. Because that I don't know, it just seems to repeat itself successfully, studio by studio, by giving that roll up and that understanding of what it means to be successful within a business, and then delegating that decision power to the production team. Man, the opportunities, the freedom, the growth, the profit. I mean, my gosh, Joel, the profit is just locked in from the beginning. All of that's just a big benefit. So I'll say, like, to wrap this up, I think that what we're saying is, hey, the interview process can be tricky. That person needs to show their cards, and you have the ability to talk to them directly, get a third party to help you interview, maybe call their references to find out a little bit more about that personality and make sure that they're the right fit for you and your personality. Not everyone's a perfect fit at every place. But also it's up to you to make them successful. And you should understand your own strengths and weaknesses when bringing somebody on, and being honest and upfront, and work with your producer, your creative director, anyone in the senior position, but work with them so that we're filling in those gaps for each other so the company can grow. And that develops that long-term loyalty and that retained knowledge that you build your business off of.
Well, I can tell by the activity in the chat here that, yeah, we struck some nerves. So sorry we don't have time to go through the points and the questions here. I'll just encourage everyone here, feel free to continue this conversation inside RevCommunity. If you're not a member there, you can certainly apply at revthink.com/community.
Thanks for joining us. It's great to have you.
We appreciate you guys, and we will see you next week. Until then, thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.